Thought Bubble Audio.
Look, up in the sky!
You will never find the more wretched hive of scum and villainy.
Welcome to Beer with Geeks with Tim and Frank.
Who are you?
I'm Batman.
I am Iron Man.
Your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Hi, Christopher. I'm Nero.
My name is Inigo Montoya.
You're a wizard, Harry.
A couple of guys with a couple of beers and a whole lot of pop culture nostalgia.
Make it so, number one.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
Name the dog, Indiana.
Life finds a way.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Now sit back and crack open a cold one, because it's time for Beer with Geeks.
It comes in paints?
Shaken, not stirred.
Great Scott!
I was way off. I knew it started with an S, though.
Hi, and welcome to Beer with Geeks, where two geeks geek out with beer. I'm Tim, and with me, as always, is my DCE irritable friend, Frank. How are you today?
You said it, buddy. You said it. I'm a little irritable today. How are you, though?
I am doing just fine. The pollen in the air is, possibly killing my lungs, but besides that, I'm doing well.
You sound pretty good.
Thank you. Well,
Yeah.
I guess that's important. That's all that really matters, isn't it?
On a podcast, it's not all that matters. I care. My friend. I care. I care about you, my friend.
I care about you, too, and your well-being, of course.
I care about your well-being, and I care about what you're drinking.
I, sir, am drinking a Maritime lager from the Newburyport Brewing Company.
I love Newburyport Brewing.
Yeah, it's quite refreshing on this summer day. What are you drinking?
I am drinking, I've never heard of this before, Alternate Dimension. I guess it's it's a Trader Joe's beer. That's why I haven't heard of it. Alternate Dimension. It's a Josephsbrau brewing company. Josephsbrau. Yes. Alternate Dimension Alt Beer Ale. And it is quite, it's a little hoppy, but it's very malt forward, and it's very like dark tasting, but sort of light bodied.
Well, Frank, I'm glad that you're drinking a dark beer, because we're here to talk about the DCEU, and nothing says dark like the DC universe.
That is
right?
true. That is very true.
So, Frank, there've been 5 DCEU movies to speak of. There's been Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and Justice League. Those are the 5, and we have Wonder Woman 84, Aquaman, and Shazam coming out, not in that order. If we're doing it in order, it would be Aquaman, Shazam, and then Wonder Woman 84 or 1984, which is the official title of the film.
I actually was curious about that, whether it was 1984, 84, or Wonder Woman 2, or what.
I think it's Wonder Woman 1984.
Cool.
Is the official title.
Cool.
It's definitely 84 or 1984. It's one of those. Anyway, the point is, Frank, that it is well documented on however many podcast episodes we've done together.
213 with this one.
213 episodes. Well documented that you are not a fan of the DCEU apart from Wonder Woman and some parts of Justice League, but mostly just Wonder Woman.
Pretty much.
And I am a DCEU defender. And while I don't think all of them are great, looking at you, Suicide Squad, I think that they hold much merit. And recently we know that Jeff Johns has stepped down as chief creative officer of DC and has kind of moved into this new role in which he'll be writing more comics and writing films and writing for their TV programming and all this different stuff. And that first movie that he's writing is the Green Lantern Corps. And as we know, Jeff Johns does Green Lantern well.
Real well.
So my question, I guess, to you is, let's reiterate for the audience, what is it about the DCEU that you do not like?
So I'm going to start this by saying this is purely subjective. This is my personal opinion. Okay, this is not, and I don't by any
So you're not a representative of Warner Brothers.
I am not a representative. Yeah, no. But what I'm also saying is, though, if you like the DCEU, good. Like, I'm glad that you're getting movies you like. I'm happy for you, but they don't do it for me. And that's like, I don't want to be convinced otherwise. I don't want to be like, I've had, conversations on Twitter where like, I'll say how I feel about them and people are like, but you have to think about this and think about that. And I'm like, no, I am. I just don't like them. And maybe I'm guilty of that too, like where I try to be like, but this is why this movie was good. But there comes a point where it's just sort of like, you can try to convince somebody a movie is good, but if they don't like it, they don't like it, and that's okay. As long as you're not yucking anybody's yum, as long as you're not, trying to say like, well, you shouldn't like this, and here's why it's bad, and you're bad for liking it. That is not what I'm saying. So I just want to get that out of the way up front so we can have a conversation about it.
Well, that's nice of you. I'm glad that you don't think I'm a bad person for like.
Well, I'm not talking about you necessarily. You are a bad person. But I'm I'm kidding. No, but like for any listeners who might be offended because they like the DCEU, I know people get very heated about Marvel versus DC, and especially now. I'm just saying, like it's not anything personal, and it's not like I think people who like them are bad. I just don't enjoy these films because the versions of most of these characters that I grew up with and always, the reason that I liked these characters, and I'll first and foremost is Superman. For me, Superman is my way into comics, right? That is what got me into comics, was my love of Superman. So if you're getting Superman wrong, and by again, wrong in quotes, my version of wrong, then it's going to be an uphill battle for me to get on board. And a couple of days ago was actually the anniversary of when Man of Steel came out.
That's correct. I rewatched it in honor.
Nice.
It took actually I didn't know it was the 5-year anniversary. I just felt like watching it.
Funny. Well, it was. And I saw my posts on Time Hop, which is this app that shows you what you posted on different social networks.
Say?
When I saw the midnight screening of it, so I saw it right away, and my initial reaction was, it was pretty good. I think I'm going to like it more the more I think about it. Turns out I liked it less the more I thought about it. I was like, there was one major thing that I disagree with, but otherwise, it's all right. And that major thing was the way that Zod goes out at the end. But
I think you can just spoil it, Frank. It's been out for 5 years.
Okay, so Superman snaps.
Most people who are listening to this episode know what happens.
That's fair. It's 5 years, and yeah, Superman snaps Zod's neck at the end of the movie, and that really didn't sit well with me, and I've disliked it more and more ever since. Now there are things about those movies that I really like. They're not all bad. Man of Steel isn't all bad. It's really good in parts. The way that they show Krypton is really cool. His first flight is a really cool sequence that made me like smile like a little kid in the theater. There's definitely really good things about these films, but I feel like there is a more cynical take instead of a joyful take in the people who worked on the first 4 or 5 DC films, not including Wonder Woman, and what we can talk about in a minute is that the creative team has changed. But I feel like there is a cynicism of there's a corporate detachment from Warner Brothers of these nerds, they like their comic book movies. We own a bunch of comic book characters, so we should make some of them. And they pulled in Zack Snyder, who knows comic books. They pulled in, they had Jeff Johns for a couple of years there at the helm in terms of being was a chief creative officer. Mm-hmm. So those are, on paper, very good steps, especially in my opinion, Jeff Johns. I love his work. But they didn't, in my opinion, the characters as they were on the screen weren't true to the roots of the characters on the page. And that's something that I think Marvel has done actually quite well, where they're not exactly the same. They're like, oh my God, they're swearing, they're cursing, they're doing, their stories are not the same, or they're twists on the Marvel stories that, but I feel like at the end of the day, Captain America is like, extols all the virtues in the movies that Captain America does in the comic books, and same for Thor, and same for Tony Stark. They are fundamentally, when you boil them down to their essence is still there, and it's still relatively intact. And I don't feel like DC has done that quite as much. I would say they've done Batman, actually. As much as people were like down on Batfleck, I think he's one of the sort of truest to his character out of Superman. Wonder Woman actually was quite true to her character, but Superman wasn't. I'm not really sure about Flash yet, because I feel like I haven't seen enough of him to really know if more than 50% of him is true to the character or not. There's a few things that are troubling to me, chief among them Superman. And that's why I kind of cut Justice League some slack, because once they started to pull back on Superman being as dark as he had been and making him more of a... Now, it was done too quickly, and suddenly the whole public seemed to be like Superman fans, even though they were all like, the end is nigh before. But I appreciate the effort there, even if it was done somewhat clumsily, to make him more of the beacon of hope and more of the like role model that I know Superman is supposed to be. I've talked a lot. It's your turn.
Okay, well, that was a good almost 10 minutes of talking from you. That was good. I have a few things to address. One, I also agree with you. About the neck snapping from Man of Steel. It doesn't really bother me anymore. I think I'm, desensitized to it in the film. I just kind of go with, okay, this is what happens. And there's comic precedent, which doesn't always have to be, movies or media influence, comics and comics influence media. It goes back and forth. It doesn't always have to come from the comics. Classic comic Krypton came from the Donner Superman film. So, so it doesn't always have to. You don't always have to pull from the material. So that I agree with you. I don't think people were down on Batfleck before Batman v Superman, but almost nobody has been down on him since then. So I think it's that, like, people were down on Heath Ledger before The Dark Knight, and then you haven't heard a bad word since. So I'm kind of pushing that to the side. That doesn't matter anymore because we're way beyond that. I do think that Justice League kind of neutered Batman in a way that I just watched Batman v Superman after Man of Steel, and having not seen it since Justice League came out, I was like, oh my god, right, like Batman was great in this movie. Like, he was really Batman, like really like dark and sober and like all this stuff. And then going back and then thinking about my memories of Batman and Justice League, I'm like, wow, that was, one, a lot of reshoots, and two, like what a different take they decided to go with that character. Almost kind of like, also, whatever, I'm Batman, I guess. It doesn't matter. Here's a joke. And so where I think you're right that the maybe classic ideal of Superman is not represented fully in the DCE universe. Wonder Woman definitely is. Mm-hmm. Batman kind of is. Yeah. Cyborg kind of is, Aquaman kind of is, Flash kind of is. We're not quite there yet.
We haven't seen enough of them to really know, right? Like once the Aquaman movie comes out later this year, and once we see more of that character having more solo time or like more time in the sun, then we'll know, like, okay, are they nailing this or not? But what little we got in Justice League, I feel like I don't really know whether they got it or not.
Right. And sometimes the Snyder take on a character is not going to be indicative of the whole. So for instance, like the Snyder take on Wonder Woman, I don't think is as good at, like in Batman v Superman, say, isn't as good as her film.
Agreed.
She's not fully realized in BVS, but she is fully realized in her film. So that's a better take.
Yeah.
Yes. And I think the same is going to have to be said for Cyborg, Aquaman, Flash, whatever. I had another point, but I think the cynicism part. I think that you're right in that they're overly cynical films, and you are not a cynical person. You're a naturally optimistic person, except when you're talking about the DCEU. And so I am kind of a cynical person, which is probably why I've attached myself to them a little bit more because I watch them and I go, yeah, that's how people would react to this. I think Man of Steel actually does that well, where it's not like, oh, wow, look at that man in a colorful costume. He just caught a helicopter. Wow, what a weird world I live in. Going to get my cup of coffee.
Right.
That's not the world. That's not how anybody reacts to anything.
So that is a really good. Well, finish your argument. I want to have a rebuttal, but I'm gonna finish it. What you're saying?
Sure. And I think, and certainly Marvel has had its time doing things like that. You know, if Civil War is built around people reacting poorly to the antics of the superheroes around them, right? But there is nobody at like the real power level in the first, say, 5 Marvel films. You know, Superman could wipe the floor with all of them. No contest. Superman shows up in Infinity War, even Thanos loses. They're just not as powerful as the DC counterparts, or at least that's how these current slate of films are portraying them. I forgot what my next point was going to be, so you go ahead and make your point right now.
Okay. So you said, like, well, that is how people would react. Like, that's realistic. You would see people, you know, mistrustful of Superman and sort of like, you know, unsure about what exactly this alien being here, what his presence means for mankind. I agree with that. But my sort of fundamental, and this is where I go back to, it's all a matter of like personal opinion and what you like and what versions of the characters you like to begin with. For me, I come at this from an angle of I'm not watching comic book stories because I want just a like pure reflection of the real world, right? I want something more uplifting. I want a beacon of hope. I want a fantasy. I want a little bit of escapism, you know, like just a touch, even just a touch. And I feel like the only fantasy element of especially the Snyder influenced films is, well, these are people with powers. And then like aside from that one element of these people have powers, or they're aliens or whatever, aside from that piece, it's like assume that was real. Go. You know, like everything, how would that actually pan out in the real world if actual aliens arrived or people actually got powers or this billionaire was actually able to build himself, armor and gadgets and everything to be a hero and be detective. So just that premise of like, what if this was like in a super realistic world the premise doesn't really interest me. So like I would read that as like a one-off, like, oh, that's an interesting like Elseworld story about like, oh, what if Superman happened like in the real world? But that's generally not why I'm gravitating towards those stories. It's more for the fantastic element of it. So that's fine. It's just that those are not the movies DCEU is giving us right now. And so that's why I'm less than pleased with them. That's how I felt a little bit about DC Comics until Rebirth, where I felt like there was a little bit of a cynical aspect and a little bit of we need to make this cooler. People don't think this stuff is cool. What can we do? Let's take things that are cool on paper and put them into these stories to make up for the fact that our characters are lame. It's coming from a position of weakness of this isn't good enough on its own. We need to spice it up to make it cool for 2018. And yes, you can say that other franchises are doing that, but that's not the fundamental like cause for the reason why stories are the way they are. There are aspects that are modernizing. Yes, you have to keep it fresh and relevant. But I feel like DC is coming from a place of we need to, or else this is lame garbage because they're old and they're goody two shoes characters. So let's make them badass. Whereas Marvel is like finding a way to do both. You can have Steve Rogers be really charming, and optimistic and, like the light in the darkness that everybody looks up to. And yet he doesn't feel lame. How are they able to do it with one hand tied behind their back because they couldn't start off with Spider-Man or Fantastic Four or the X-Men. They were able to do that, and yet DC can't with their big guns coming out. I mean, arguably their biggest, their longest running character certainly was the first one to kick off this universe. And they haven't been able to, even on a box office level, be able to, or a critical level, reach the same level of success that Marvel has.
All right, so I have a couple of points to this. So I think it's important to remember that Man of Steel is a direct reaction to the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yes.
Because the Dark Knight trilogy, particularly Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises, made Warner Brothers billions of dollars.
Yes.
And that is a trilogy of films that goes, okay, what if they are in a real world?
Yes.
Right? And so what if a man dressed like a bat and fought crime in the real world, and they're cynical and dark, and it worked? And so that same formula was then applied to Man of Steel.
And that's the problem.
Let me finish. Let me finish. What if aliens were real in the real world? How would people react? And so even just counting the Superman part of it, it's just, what if aliens were real? How would people react? And so from a business standpoint, you can see on paper, which is to your point where they're not fans. They're just, suits looking at numbers going, okay, this made us billions of dollars with this popular character. So therefore, this popular character will also make us billions of dollars with the same formula, discounting that's not true to that particular character. Which is also why if you watch the progression of those 5 films, they get more comic booky as they go on, because that formula doesn't work it only works with characters who are depowered. Once they have supernatural elements to them or science fiction elements to them, doesn't work. That formula doesn't work anymore. So I understand that point where you want escapism, and the world reacting as realistically is not escapism for you, which I agree with, which is why I think if you're actually talking about the Dark Knight trilogy, those films are not as, quote, like, rewatchable as say a Disney movie, because you're reminded of the real world and the terrible things that can happen, whereas say Oliver and Company is like, oh, the dog's on the run, but then the dog gets found and there's a Billy Joel song and I feel happy at the end of this. It's a completely different sensation. I don't think that doesn't make them any less good or bad. It's just, like you said, it's personal taste. But I think what can be perceived as then lack of direction from that hurts your audience. And so which we know plagued the DCEU. So Man of Steel had a clear direction, which is why it's probably one of the better films out of the whole lineup. It's a well-constructed movie. There are no plot holes or, weird casting or anything like that. It's actually a really solidly made movie that one thing really turns fans one way or the other. And so, having actually even just rewatched it, there's even a lot of optimism in that. There's a lot of optimism in that film, and that can you expect that kind of optimism to kind of continue, because the film ends optimistically. So you want it to continue into BVS, and it doesn't. It talks about the optimism. It talks about people being on Superman's side and everything, but there's a big gap of time between Man of Steel and BVS in which we don't see that optimism play out. So it goes from cynical to cynical, which is unhelpful for a viewer, because I'm like, yes, I understand that people love Superman in the comics, but as a viewer, I need to see that on a screen. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. Don't tell me, show me. It's a visual medium. You need to show me these things exist. So, but if you go back and you really listen to the dialogue, a lot of it is about how people are on Superman's side, and it's actually a small minority that's like, Superman needs to answer for things, but it doesn't even start until he goes to save Lois in the Middle East. That's the thing that flips the switch for people on Superman, which is the beginning of the film. So you don't see the optimism before that. That's the problem. And then Suicide Squad, as we know, is like a direct, like, hey, we released this amazing trailer and everyone went bonkers over it because the movie looked so much fun. So then Suicide Squad is just a reaction to that. People going, oh my God, that's not the movie we made. And we actually made a dark movie. Quick, switch the things, add some color. And that didn't work. But Justice League was already being made by that point because it was basically filmed back to back with BVS. And so it was too late to course correct that in the middle of production because production was almost done. They were moving into post-production by the time all this happened. So then Wonder Woman is the first film really past Justice League that has been like, hey, this is our new direction. And so I think it's actually unfair to say all the DCEU movies are going to be terrible moving forward, for people who didn't like Man of Steel, BVS, Suicide Squad, whatever, because Wonder Woman should be your now example of what it's going to be moving forward, because most of the people who were in charge of Wonder Woman are still there moving forward. This is our optimistic direction, and there's still a bit of cynicism in it, right? There's still that, in some ways, like, I wouldn't call it real world reaction, but it's still not, doesn't feel as comic booky as, say, Guardians of the Galaxy. Or
it doesn't.
Like right. And so moving forward from Wonder Woman, you're talking Aquaman, Shazam, and Wonder Woman 1984. Those are the movies that you should judge on the new merit moving forward. I think Justice League is here, look, we tried to course correct for you, but it was almost too late.
It was.
So I think it was very important for WB to kind of bridge the two fan bases together, because the Snyder fan base is quite large. It's not, they have a very powerful voice. It's quite large. And the Snyder haters are also, I wouldn't call it a 50-50 split, but it's pretty close. And, because these movies do well at the box office. They don't do great. They do, or at least Justice League didn't do great. It did well. And so I think it's important to bridge those two fan bases together. And so you have to include some elements of everything for both. But I think, say, like that poster of Shazam with him sipping on the soda, that's true to that character. I'm looking at that going, yeah, you got it just from the poster. Like, you totally get it. Even like the Suicide Squad poster, like, they didn't get those characters. They don't get those. The marketing team doesn't get those characters from the poster. Yeah, they're bright and colorful and weird and hot topicy and whatever, but that's not really who any of those characters are. The Shazam, you got that character. The Entertainment Weekly stuff that came out for Aquaman looks amazing. I was like, oh wow, you understand that character now. That's a high seas adventure. I'm going to watch Pirates of the Caribbean with Aquaman, and it's going to be awesome. Or Lord of the Rings underwater, or something like that. That's cool. You got it. You, without even seeing a trailer, you're like, okay, I trust you. James Wan is a good director. He's never made a bad film that I've seen. So I have nothing but to trust you at that point. So I guess my question for you is, if Aquaman, Shazam, and Wonder Woman 84 are all good movies, are you still going to be on the side of, well, they're not doing it right?
I mean, if they turn the ship around, if of these upcoming 3 movies, if 2 are, if I like 2 of them, and like I said, this is purely subjective, but if 2 of them are like what I think the level of quality and the level of storytelling I think they should be, then I will be relieved. And I'll say, okay, there was Wonder Woman, and now there was 2 of these 3 that they've turned around. I feel like we're on firmer footing.
Yeah, I would. That's good. That's good to hear, because I don't want every movie to come out and go, oh, well, it was good, but it was probably a fluke. Oh, well, it was good, but it was probably a fluke. Eventually not just you, but I guess the naysayers are going to have to at one point see a few good films in a row and go, oh, well, maybe
that's
got it.
That's the thing. And like, there's the common, moviegoer, there's the typical moviegoer, passive, not a big DC fan. So in other words, not you and me. Do they, well, I guess on the one hand, do they really I feel like some people don't even know like what's DC and what's Marvel.
Oh, they definitely don't. Absolutely.
Although
no
I feel
idea.
like when people say like it's a Marvel movie, that carries a lot of weight even nowadays for common audiences, for like
that's definitely true. The brand carries weight, but what characters belong to that brand is still a little up in the air for some people. There are still some people wondering why Marvel has not made a Batman movie, even though Batman has appeared in 3 out of the 5 DCEU movies.
Yes.
Technically 4 if you count the email from Bruce to Diana in Wonder Woman. So 5 if you count the Wayne Enterprises satellite and Man of Steel. So basically Batman's been in all 5, 4.5. And so, but people wonder those, people just don't know. But it's not something that they should know. Like, do you know how many companies, like, I don't know, how many magazines are under the Vogue banner?
Right. I get what you're saying. They don't know what publisher publishes what. Like, yeah.
Right. It's not their world.
But when the movies come out, I think it's not everyone and not most people, but some people kind of, oh, that's a DC movie and that's a Marvel movie. But if you pop quiz someone on the street and said Batman, DC or Marvel, they'd be like, I don't know. I guess Marvel, because I like him and I like the Marvel characters, right? So is he Marvel? No? Oh, crap. Like, that I think is how it would go. In fact, if you search Twitter for like Marvel Batman, you'll find people saying exactly what you just said. Like, why hasn't Marvel made a Batman movie yet? Anyway, I want these movies to be good. I've wanted them to be good since Man of Steel, like especially Man of Steel, because that's my favorite character. And I was all excited for it, and I had it as my phone wallpaper for like months before the movie came out. Like the poster of him like flying.
You're so cute.
I'm a total nerd, and I wanted Superman to be good, and I was like, oh, this is only okay. And then as time went on, I was like, I don't think I like this. Does that make me a bad Superman fan if I don't like this major movie? But I've now come around where I'm like, I don't like it, and it's okay that I don't like it. It's just not my interpretation of the character. It's okay if you do like it. Like what you like, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But don't get mad at me for not liking it. Not you, Tim, but don't get mad at me for not liking it.
I don't know. No, well, I think your dislike is well documented. I mean, there's a big difference between saying, I don't like it because the tone is not for me, versus
it's a bad movie.
I don't like it because it's a bad movie and they're stupid and I don't.
I'll agree wholeheartedly with what you said a couple of minutes ago, where I think that Man of Steel is probably the best movie out of Wonder Woman's probably the best movie.
I think Wonder Woman is the best movie.
But before Wonder Woman came out, Man of Steel was the best film. And I don't like it. I don't enjoy it, but it's a good movie. It's a well-constructed film. And Justice League is probably the shakiest of those movies.
No, I think Suicide Squad
we can agree to disagree there. I thought Suicide Squad was fine. I didn't have as many problems with it as many people have had. But
it's a poorly edited film. It's not really
I agree with that. I agree with that. The editing was not
some
good.
Things just don't fit together. It just does not fit together the way that it should. It's got a very odd pace. It takes way too long to get
My
going.
point is this, and I think we can agree on this. The movies where there was a lot of interference after principal photography was over, that is where you feel that. And you may not be able to pinpoint exactly the moments. Like, people were trying to be like, oh, that's a Snyder joke and that's a Whedon joke or whatever in Justice League. It doesn't matter specifically whether it's a Snyder moment or a Whedon moment. What matters is you can feel that the whole product was altered and that the vision of the creator wasn't seen through to completion because a committee decided they were going to look at the spreadsheet and make changes based on that instead of letting somebody make the movie they wanted to make. And so ultimately those movies are worse off for it because you have too many cooks. Too many cooks.
There are too many cooks.
Too many cooks.
Too
It's
many
too
cooks.
many cooks.
I think you are correct, and I what I think is actually an interesting point about that is that the interference that you speak, the studio interference that you speak of, you don't get in Man of Steel,
correct,
BVS, and Wonder Woman. So they actually
Yes.
better films.
That's
in
what I'm
that
saying.
sense.
Agreed.
Like I just finished the extended cut of BVS, and I know it's the extended cut, so it wasn't everything that was in theater. But I watched it. I was like, this is like. There are some things that I don't like about it, but it all fits. It all makes sense. And I mean, the characters are true to the narrative that they've created. Like they might not be, although actually Superman might be like, he might be sad in that movie because people aren't on his side, but he's not, he's recognizable as the character. You prefer to him to like the story to revolve him being like an inspiration of hope. And the story is like questioning his authority on being a hopeful figure, but Henry Cavill's performance itself, or like he is recognizably Clark Kent and Superman.
Yes, yes.
And so
he's never been my problem.
It's not a market. No,
yeah,
he's quite good, and I think most casting in the DCEU is actually fine, really. Some of them are not the versions of the characters that you might expect. So let's say Jason Momoa's Aquaman is not the clean-cut blonde 50s Aquaman, but he's certainly the 1990s Peter David Aquaman. Like, he's very much that style, which is a legitimate version of that character. So it might not be everyone's version, but it's also the one that currently exists in the comics right now. So it's so sometimes it's not the characters, it's the narrative that they've chosen to share about those characters. And I think that Wonder Woman has a narrative that pleases more people. And I think that these three movies moving forward are going to have narratives that please more people because they've finally figured out how to do something. I think maybe Warner Brothers might be figuring out how to do something their way without feeling like they're copying, but also not just applying a cookie cutter formula that worked for one character to dozens of characters.
That's a really good way of distilling down what I feel like their problem has been, because they're like, well, we're not going to do what Marvel did because that's just too copycat. So we refuse to do that outright. So what else? Anyone have any other suggestions? And the other suggestion that they seem to have wanted to go with is like, well, this worked for Batman. Why don't we do it for Superman? Great, let's do it. Well, people didn't like this, so let's tweak it a little bit. All right, let's keep tweaking. And now I feel like you're right. With Wonder Woman and hopefully onward, they have figured out, like found their footing and figured out what they need to do. And I really think one of the key things is having people who understand, who actually like the characters and understand them. I've read too many things from Zack Snyder and David Goyer where they say like, yeah, I don't really get Superman. Like, I don't get what the big deal is about him, but I'm going to try and make him relevant. And I can understand why you would think like, oh, this guy sees what doesn't resonate about this character and he wants to make it resonate with modern audiences. I can understand why you would hear that guy say that and be like, that's who we're going to hire to do our Superman movie. But it didn't, in my opinion, didn't work. It Man of Steel did very well at the box office, but over the last couple of years, that overall direction has not resounded with people. And there are those who will say, well, if WB would have stayed hands off and let Snyder and the other creatives make the films they wanted to make without getting WB's hands involved, maybe the other films would have done well at the box office too, would have done even better at the box office. And maybe that's true. But as somebody who didn't care for the direction that they seem to be going, I'm kind of glad that they're now, it seems to be, they're course correcting.
No, there's a big part of me that just actually wishes that like I just show me what that creator can make, because ultimately they're always going to make these films. As long as these companies hold these IPs, they will make these films. They might go through lags, like we might not get as many of them in 10 years as we're getting now, but that's okay. In another 10 years, it'll start all over again with a different direction. And so a part of me says, you know what? So show me 10 films that are cynical, because then I'm going to get another 10 films in a little while that aren't. And then I'll watch, you know what I mean? And I'll have different versions for different moods, and then everybody's happy. So
nothing wrong with that.
No, it's not. I think we should revisit this after Comic-Con, because I'm sure there will be the Aquaman trailers showing up at Comic-Con, as we know. So I'm sure there'll be other things to talk about.
I would love to do that. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, well then, Frank, where can the people...
They can find us at beerwithgeeks.com, beerwithgeeks@gmail.com, at beerwithgeeks on Twitter. Thought Bubble Audio is where you can find this podcast and a whole host of other shows, including Supergirl TV Talk. We just had our finale this past week, so if you've been watching Supergirl, you want to check out our finale recap. Of course, you can also find shows like Hate Watch with us, which is always a delight. You can find Academy Rewind, which is coming back in July. We gave you a little taste of one of our fan favorite episodes last week on this feed, and hopefully you liked it enough you could check out Academy Rewind. I also want to mention a podcast that I am working on separately, and that is the Untitled Tech Podcast. If you like technology, if you're sort of like an enthusiast and just a fan, you like Apple or Samsung or Google or Amazon or whatever, me and Brent from Suicide Squadcast, say that 3 times fast, and Fans Without Borders, and the DC TV Squadcast. Brent and I have started this little venture where we're just talking about technology every other week. We're going to do it for a few weeks, see if we like it, see if we want to continue it. So tell us if you like it. Check us out at untitledtechpodcast.com or anywhere you can find podcasts, and we'll have a blast doing that.
Cool. Well, Frank, this has been a cheery conversation.
Indeed.
I think, of course. But I say, until next time, cheers.